So here is just a crash course in factoring. So first off, we're going to talk about trinomials. We're going to talk about three types of factoring. Rules for a trinomial means there's three terms, like a tricycle has three wheels, trinomial has three terms. So here we have ax squared plus bx plus c. There's our trinomial going on there. The a, b, and c, those are our coefficients. Those are going to be important. Okay, and those are just the numbers in front of the variables, not the x themselves. So the first thing I want to mention is something that's helpful. You don't need to know it, but it is helpful, is if you always look at the sign right in front of the constant there, it tells you something. If that value right there is positive, then you know that both of your factors are going to have the same sign. In other words, it's going to be x plus, or it's going to be x minus, but they both have the same sign, all right? And if you want to know which sign they have, then you can look right here, and that'll tell you. If that's positive, they're both going to be positive. So like here tells you same sign, there it tells you they're both positive. Here it tells you same sign, there it tells you they're both going to be negative. So x minus. If the number, now here, if the number right before the C is a negative number, right there, that tells you your signs are going to be opposite. One of them is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. You'll have one positive, one negative. This is just kind of a helpful thing to know so that you can kind of double check your answer. All right. So in factoring trinomials, there are two steps. First, very important thing, before every problem, what you want to do is check to see if you can take out a greatest common factor. If you can, you pull that out front, greatest common factor, and then whatever you're left with, you'll be factoring that part separately. Second thing is, to factor trinomials, there are so many different ways to factor. Like, you may have been taught the X method or the box method, or there's actually two types of X methods. You may have been taught trial and error or backwards FOIL. So in this video, I'm just gonna stick with one method that I feel is pretty easy, and we'll go with that. But no matter which method you learned, you always have to find factors of A, C that'll add up to B. Always. What am I talking about? A, C, and B. Way up here at the very beginning. A is the number before x squared. B is the number before the x, and C is the constant. So you always want to multiply A times C, and you want factors of AC that will add to give you B. All right, so let's look at some. I'm going to start off by just showing you this practice example here. So the very first thing we do is we see if there's a greatest common factor that we can pull out front of all of these. All right, so the way you find the greatest common factor, start with the smallest number and say 8. Can I pull an 8 out of these? No, neither of those are divisible by 8. All right, so then factors of 8 go down to 2 and 4. So look at the next biggest, 4. Can I take a 4 out of both of these? No. How about a 2? Can I take a 2 out of both of these? Yes. So that's where we'll start. I can take a 2 out, and it leaves me with, these parentheses are very important. These are the, it leaves me with parentheses, okay? It leaves me with, back in our equation, we say 12 divided by 2 is 6x squared. 10 divided by 2 is plus 5x, and 8 divided by 2 is minus 4, okay? So we pulled out our greatest common factor, it's right here. It doesn't disappear, it's gonna still be there, but our goal is to have 2, and then we'll factor the rest of it here in just a second. So what we're gonna focus on now is the stuff in the middle. So our is the number right in front of x squared. B is going to be 5, the number in front of x, and C will be negative 4. And then you're always going to want AC. So I'm multiplying a times c. 6 times -4 is -24. So our goal is to have factors of AC that are going to add to give us B. So when you're thinking of factors of 24, I just think of factors of, I always make it positive to begin with. Factors of 24, we can look here and say, hey, that's negative. So I know one side's going to be positive and one side sign is going to be negative. So I know my two numbers are going to have opposite signs, but I don't have to worry about that at the moment. So you can sit here and think of your factors of 24, like 1 and 24, 2 and 12, but if you have a graph calculator with you, which you often do, let me just remind you how you can also find factors on your calculator. Go to y equals on your calculator, so I went to y equals, and I want factors of 24. So I'm going to type in 24 divided by x. And then I'm going to go to my table up here. Second graph. And you always start with 1. And so it's a factor if it is a whole number. And so we have 1, 24. We have 2 and 12. 3 and 8. 4 and 6. And then 5 is not a factor, but 6, 4 is the same thing as 4, 6. So we start repeating at that point. So these are our factors of 24. And if I make one of those positive and one of those negative, and again, I know to do that because of that sign right there, I need them to add up to be positive 5. And so I'm looking right here. If I make this one negative and the 8 positive, they would add up to be positive 5. All right, so I've got that taken care of. So what I do is I'm going to draw my box. Two are very, very easy. First number is 12x squared, not 12x squared, sorry. I'm factoring this down here, this one right here. So the first number I'm going to put in is 6x squared, and that always goes in the top left corner, or whatever number it is. And then the other number was -4, and that's always going to go in the bottom right corner, always. So you take your first term and it goes in the top left corner, your last term goes in the bottom right corner. And then we just came up with these right here, -3 and 8. So you can put them wherever you want, just add an x to them. -3x, 8x. I could have wrote 8x, -3x, it doesn't matter. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pulling, and this is opposite. When you read left to right, top to bottom. So this is opposite of reading, okay? We're going to be going right to left and up. So pulling toward the left, what you do is the last term when you're pulling, if it's positive or negative, that's the sign that goes with it. So this one's a -3, so it's negative. And then you pull out the greatest common factor between 3x and 4. They have no number in common other than 1, and there is no x, so it's just -1. Pulling this one, the 6 is a positive, so this is a positive number. The biggest number I can pull out of 6 and 8 is going to be a 2, and I can pull an x out of both. Now I'm going to pull up to the top. Pulling to the top, the 6x was a positive, so we have a positive. The biggest number I can get is 3 out of 6 and 3, and I can get 1x out of both of those. Pulling to the top, 8x is positive, so this will be positive. And the biggest number I can get out of those is 4, and I can't get an x out of them. And now all the work is done, you just need to put your answer together. So reading across this top part right here, I have 3x plus 4. And reading right here, I have 2x minus 1. And I'm done. So if you want to try to do the rest of these on your own before watching the video, pause the video and try them. All right, so I'm going to keep going here. So on number 1, first thing we want to do is see, can we pull out a greatest common factor from all 3 of those? And we cannot. All right, next thing we do is we're going to write our A, B, C, and AC. So our A is the number in front of x squared, which is 1. B is the number in front of X, which is negative 10, and C is negative 24. A times C is negative 24. This sign right there tells me that one of my signs is going to be positive, one's going to be negative. One's positive, one's negative. All right. Next thing I do is I need factors of 24. I happen to have just done factors of 24, so I'm going to use those again. So those were 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. And I need them to add to give me negative 10, if one's positive and one is negative. So if one is positive and one is negative, the ones that add to give me negative 10 are going to be positive 2 and negative 12. So I'm going to have positive 2x, negative 12x. Okay? So I'm going to draw my box. And the top two numbers, x squared goes right here, and negative 24 goes the bottom right. And then I just came up with positive 2x and negative 12x, put one of them in one place and one in the other. And then I'm going to pull to the left and up and get my greatest common factors. So pulling to the left, the last term is a positive, so I know this is a positive. The biggest number I can get from 2 and 24 is 2, and I can't get an x. Pulling to the left, it's a positive. Biggest number I can get out of that is 1, and I get an x. Pulling up, it ends in a positive, so this is a positive. Can't get a number, but I can get an x. Pulling up. Last number I pulled to was a negative, so this is going to be a negative because of that negative 12 right there. Biggest number I can get from 12 and 24 is 12, and I cannot get an x. So now it's time for me to read my answers. So here are my answers right there. I just have to write them. X minus 12, x plus 2. All right, number 2. First thing we decide is, can we pull out a greatest common factor from all three terms? And we can. We can pull an x out, and it leaves us with x squared plus 12x minus 28, which is great. So now we're just going to focus on factoring these numbers. Okay, so I know I'm going to need an a, b, a c, and an ac. And I also know I'm going to have a box. And I know that the first number in my box is going to be x squared. And I know the last number in my box is going to be negative 28. My a, the number in front of x squared, is 1. B is 12. C is negative 28. And if I multiply a times c, I'll get negative 28. I'm going to come back in here. Because of this sign right here, it's a negative. That tells me that my signs are going to be opposite. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. I need factors of 28 that are going to add to give me 12. So factors of 28. So you can sit there and think of them, 1 and 28 and so forth. If you need to use your calculator, that's okay too. So I'm going to come to y equals, and I'm going to type in 28 divided by x and go to my table. And so I can see my factors are 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 3 is not pretty, 4 and 7, and I can scroll down and I start repeating. So if one of these was positive and one of them's negative, I need them to add to give me a positive 12. So that's going to be this one right here. We have a negative 2 and a positive 14. So I'm going to write negative 2x and a positive 14x. All right. I know this is where I was. I know I'm going to end up with the x in front and then factoring. So I'm going to pull to the left first. Pulling to the left, the last number I hit is a negative 2, so this will be negative. the biggest number, greatest common factor from 2 and 28 is 2. Pulling to the left, last number's positive. Biggest, greatest common factor I get is x. Pulling up, last number's positive. Greatest common factor would be x. And pulling up, last number's positive. And the greatest common factor of 14 and 28 is 14. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick little trick also. If you're just trying to find the greatest common factor of two numbers, you can also do that on your calculator. If you come to your calculator and click on Math right here, Math, and then go over to Number, and you scroll up, you'll hit GCD. That's greatest common divisor. That's the same thing as greatest common factor. So again, I went to Math, over to Number, and I scrolled up to GCD. And I want to know the greatest common factor between 14, and here's a comma above the 7, and 28. And you hit enter, and you find out, oh, that's 14. All right, so we have all we need. So x plus 14 goes in one side, and x minus 2 goes in the other. We'll do a couple more trinomials, and then we'll look at some different things. So number 3, first thing we do is pull out a greatest common factor, but there's nothing we can pull out of all 3 of these. They have nothing in common. And so I'll go ahead and write my A, B, C, AC. And I can go ahead and do my box. And I know the top left corner of my box is going to be 8x squared, and the bottom right corner of my box is going to be 9. My A is 8, B is negative 18, and C is 9. A times C, 8 times 9 is 72. Because the number right in front of the constant is a positive, this tells me I'm going to have the same sign in my parentheses. And if I look over here, it tells me they're both going to be negative. So I'm going to have 2 negatives in my parentheses when I'm factoring here in a bit. So I'll be looking for 2 negative numbers. All right, so factors of 72. You can think them through, or you can use your calculator over here. And I'm going to go to y equals and 72 and go to my table, second graph, and I have 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 6 and 12, and if we scroll down, they would, oh, just kidding, 8 and 9, and then 9 and 8, so they start to repeat. If both of these were negative and I added them together, which 2 would give me negative 18? And so that would be right here. If both of those were negative, negative 6, negative 12, they would add to negative 18. So I'm going to have a negative 6x and a negative 12x. All right, so pulling to the left, my last sign is a negative, so this is a negative. And the greatest common factor between 6 and 9 is 3. Pulling to the left, my last number is positive, so this will be positive. The greatest common factor between 8 and 12 is 4, and I can also get an x. Pulling to the top, my last number is positive, so this is positive. My greatest common factor between 8 and 6 is going to be 2. Just for grins and giggles, I'll show you this again. You can go to Math, Number, up to GCD, and you can type in 8, get out of there for a second quick. Math, Number, scroll up to GCD, 8, 6, and you would find the greatest common factor is 2, or the greatest common divisor is 2. But we also have an x. And if I pull up, my last number is a negative, so this is a negative. The greatest common factor between 12 and 9 is going to be 3. And so writing out my answers, I don't have a greatest common factor to go in front. That's always important to look for. I have 2x minus 3, and then I have 4x minus 3. So just like I said, both numbers are negative. We're going to do one more trinomial. And just so you know, trinomials are the hardest ones to factor. The rest of them are easier than trinomials. So the first thing we do is we're going to see if we can pull out a greatest common factor from all of these. And so what you do is you start with the smallest number, 3, and you say, is 6 divided by 3? Can I divide 6 by 3? Yes. Can I divide 45 by 3? Yes. If you don't know, check. 45 divided by 3. Got it. So yes, I can pull a 3 out of everything. That's my greatest common factor. It leaves me with x squared minus 2x minus 15. So I know my final answer is going to be 3, parentheses. Okay, coming back to that. I also know, because number right, the sign right in front of the constant is negative, that one of these is going to be positive and one of them is going to be negative. Opposite signs. So I'm going to go ahead and write my A, B, C, AC, and I'm going to go ahead and draw my box. And I'm going to go ahead and put 3x squared in the top left corner of my box. I'm going to go ahead and put negative 45 in the bottom right corner of my box. Always take the sign with it. All right, so my A value, I'm looking right here. My A value is 1, my B value is negative 2, and my C value is negative 15. A times C is negative 15. So I need factors of 15 that are going to add to give me negative 2. So I know I have 1 and 15, 3 and 5. If one of them's positive and one of them's negative, this is the one that would add to give me negative 2. I would need a positive 3 and a negative 5. So I have a positive 3x and a negative 5x. All right. So pulling this direction. So greatest common factor I can pull out. Last thing I hit is a positive, so it'll be a positive. And the greatest common factor of 3 and 45 is 3. Pulling this way. Greatest common, the last thing I pull to is positive, and the greatest common number I can pull out is 1, but I can pull out an x. Okay, now I'm going to pull up. The biggest number I can pull out of those is a 3, but I can also pull out an x. And I'm going to pull up, and the last number I pulled to is negative 5, so this will be negative. Biggest number I can get from 5 and 45 is 5. And so filling in my rest of my stuff up here for my answer box, I'm going to have 3x minus 5 and x plus 3. All right, so that's for trinomials. Binomials, so a bicycle has 2 wheels, a binomial has 2 terms. They're a little bit easier to me. A little bit. So if it's a binomial, has 2 terms, then there's 2 things you do. So 2 terms, 2 ways to factor. That's something to remember. If there's 2 terms, there's 2 ways to factor. The first thing is the same first thing for everything. The first thing is you want to pull out the greatest common factor. The second thing is if there's 2 terms, you're looking for the difference of 2 squares. So the word difference means subtraction. Okay, so it has to be subtracting. And 2 squares means some term being squared minus some other term that's being squared. That's the difference of 2 squares. So for example, a squared minus b squared is the difference, subtracting 2 squares. And this is just something you got to memorize. So a squared minus b squared will always factor to be a plus b, a minus b. Or you can do it the other way around. You can say a minus b, a plus b. Either way, every time. So my first example, I have 2 terms. First thing I do is say, can I pull out a greatest common factor from those 2 terms? No. So then I look to see, is this the difference of two squares? Yes, it's x squared and 6 squared. So my answer is going to be x plus 6, x minus 6, simply because that is the formula for the difference of two squares. You could have also put x minus 6, x plus 6. Number 6. First thing I do, can I pull out a greatest common factor? So biggest number between 7 and 28 is 7. And I have 5 x's here and 3 there, so I could pull out 3 of them from both terms. And it leaves me with, for this first one, I pulled out the 7 and 3 of the x's, so it leaves me with 2 x's. 28 divided by 7 is 4. And I put out all of those x's. So binomial, 2 terms, 2 ways. I just did the first one, pulled out my greatest common factor, but now I still need to see what's left. Is that the difference of 2 squares right there? And it is. That is x squared minus 2 squared. And so we're going to have 7x cubed, and then we'll have x plus 2, x minus 2. Number 7, don't let that 1 trick you, because 1 squared is also 1. So anytime there's a 1, it could be squared. So we have 1 squared minus m squared. So this is also the difference of 2 squares here. So just like a squared minus b squared would be a plus b, a minus b, this one's going to be 1 plus m, 1 minus m. Number 8, first thing we do, can we pull out a greatest common factor? No. And so we can't pull out a greatest common factor. So the next question, is it the difference of 2 squares? So it is a difference, it's a subtraction, so that's good. This only works for subtraction. And so is this term, can I pick a term that's squared would give me 4k squared. So 2 squared would give me 4, and k squared would give me k squared. So 2k squared would give me 4k squared. Minus 25 is 5 squared. So again, just like a squared minus b squared would be a plus b, a minus b, this one's going to be 2k plus 5, 2k minus 5. Number 9. Okay, I want to pull out any greatest common factor I might have, which I don't have anything in common. So then I want to ask myself, is this something squared minus, yes it's a minus, something squared. So 49 I know is 7 squared. 9, that's 3 squared. And this throws you off a little bit, but m squared squared, you multiply those exponents. Power to power, you multiply. So that's actually m to the 4th. And so if you're wanting to know what squared would give you m to the 4th, it's going to be m squared. And so we have the difference of 2 squares. So I have 3m squared plus 7 and 3m squared minus 7. Number 10. First you see, can you pull out a greatest common factor from these two? And I can pull out a 3 and an x. And it leaves me with, right here it leaves me with x squared minus 48 divided by 3 is 16, and I pulled out the x altogether. Once you pull out the greatest common factor, you then ask yourself, is that a difference of 2 squares remaining? Yes, yes it is. That is x squared minus 4 squared. So we're going to end up with our 3x, and then x plus 4, x minus 4. So what you have to remember when there's 2 terms is it has to be the difference of 2 squares. If there was a plus sign there, we wouldn't even be checking anything except the greatest common factor. All right, the last type of problem I'm going to remind you of on how to factor is when there's 4 terms. So this is one of the easier ones. So trinomials is the hardest, binomials is the second hardest, but 4 terms is actually one of the easier. So when there's 4 terms, what you want to do is you want to group the first 2 terms together. And so I want to make sure my negative sign in front of that negative 75 stays with the 75. So I'm just drawing a line right there, separating my first 2 terms from my second 2 terms. And then what you want to do is you want to pull out the greatest common factor from just these first 2 terms. So I need the greatest common number between 105 and 175. So they both ended on 5, so I can start checking that way. But just a reminder, you have your calculator here, so you can go to math, and then over to number, and scroll up to greatest common divisor, and we have 105, 175. So the greatest common divisor is actually 35. So I'm going to pull out a 35. And then I have 3 ends here and 2 ends there. The most ends I could take out of both would be 2. And it leaves me with, so 105 divided by 35. So I'll come over here and say 105 divided by 35 is 3. And it leaves me with an n plus, and then I want to know what 175 divided by 35 is. So I'll type that in, and that's 5, and I'll put out all of those ends. All right, so that's my left side. Here's a big hint. Told to practice factoring 4 terms. There is a strong possibility that this term right here is going to appear on the other side of this line. I'll show you. Another thing, note, if the second group begins with a negative, always pull out the negative. So the second group does begin with a negative, so I'm going to pull the negative out, and I want the greatest common factor between 75 and 125. And so you could go to math, num, greatest common divisor, and do 75, 125. And so it's 25, and it leaves me with, and again, my big hint, it should leave you with 3n plus 5, but we'll check. So if I divide negative 75 by negative 25, I would get 3, and I still have the n. I took negative out, and so I'm left with a positive. Another way you can think of it is, you want to say negative 125, and I took out 25, so you can do negative 125 divided by negative 25, and you'll see it's a positive 5. Oh, what luck. It is exactly what we needed. So since we have the same big term on both sides, that means we are going to literally factor that term out front. And our other term is going to be 35n squared minus 25. Yay. So if you want to try these next ones by yourself, you can pause the video. All right, so we have 4 terms. I'm going to divide it right in front of the sign there. On the left side, I'm going to pull out my greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor between 8 and 64 is going to be 8. And I can pull out 2 v's. And it leaves me with, so I put out the 8, and I had 3 v's, but I put out 2 v's, so it leaves me with 1 v minus 64 divided by 8 leaves me with 8, and I pulled both those v's out. So I have this v minus 8. If all goes well on the other side, I will also have v minus 8. So on the other side, I look and I see greatest common factor I can pull out of both. Nothing. Okay? And so I always keep my sign. So I can literally only pull out 1. And it leaves me with v minus 8. Hey, what do you know? V minus 8. Great. So I have the same term, so I'm going to pull it out to the front. And whatever's left over, 8v squared plus 1 is the rest of my problem. Number 12, I'm going to draw my dividing line. Make sure I don't separate that negative from the 56. Biggest number I can pull out of 24 and 15. So you can sit there and think it through, or you can use your calculator. Either way, you're going to come up with 3. And I can pull out 2 p's. And it leaves me with 24 divided by 3 is 8. If I take away 2 of those p's, I have 1 left. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and I took away both p's. So if all goes well, I'm also going to see 8p plus 5 on the right side. We'll see. If all does not go well, either I messed up or it's not factorable. There's a negative. I'm definitely going to pull out a negative. And here's a little hint. If I know I want it to be 8p, then I can look at 56 and say, hey, I'm going to try to pull out a 7. Because 7 times 8 is 56. And it leaves me with negative 56 divided by negative 7 is 8, and I still have a p. Negative 35 divided by negative 7 is a positive 5. And oh my gosh, that is exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to pull my 8p plus 5 term out front, and it leaves me with 3p squared minus 7. Number 13, 4 terms, dividing line. Greatest common factor of the first term. Biggest number I can pull out of those is a 3. I could also pull out an x squared, and it leaves me with 12 divided by 3 is 4. I had 3 x's, took away 2, so now I have 1. Minus 21 divided by 3 is 7, and I took out both of those x's. All right. So the thing I'm hoping to see is 4x minus 7 occur on the right side. So on the right side, I'm going to have positive, oops, that's too big right there, positive sign. Biggest number I can pull out of both of these is a 7, and it leaves me with 28 divided by 7 is 4x minus 49 divided by 7 is 7. Awesome. It's exactly what I wanted. So now if I pull that out front, I'll have 4x minus 7 times 3x squared plus 7, yay. Last one. I know you're sad like me, you wish we had more. Draw a line. Biggest number I can take out of 63 and 54. Could be thinking on this one. If you got 9, might be right, but let me show you. You could always come over here on your calculator and go to Math, Num, go to GCD, Greatest Common Divisor, and type in 63, 54, and we got 9. And I can pull out 2 ends, leaves me with 63 divided by 9 is 7, 1 end left, plus 54 divided by 9 is 6. This is what I'm hoping for right there. On the other side, I have that negative sign I'm going to pull out, and then greatest common factor of 105 and 90. So I could do back over here again. Oops. Enter. Greatest common divisor of 105, 90 is 15. And then I want negative 105, I'm going to use my calculator on this one, divided by negative 15 is 7 in. And then negative 90 divided by negative 15 is positive 6. Awesome sauce. That is what I wanted. So I'm going to pull that out front, and it leaves me with, yay. Okay, so this one has a slight thing that doesn't usually occur, but we actually, in what's left over, we actually have a 3 we can pull out of both, 9 and 15. So if I pulled a 3 out front from here, 9n squared divided by 3 is 3n squared, minus 15 divided by 3 is 5. All right, so that does not usually happen. That's more of a like upper, hey, expand your brain kind of moment right there. All right, hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.